Right, so good afternoon everybody and welcome to today's EAUC webinar. The title of this webinar is Embedding Innovation, Enterprise and the Circular Economy into Teaching and Learning, and will last approximately an hour. It is in the Resource Efficiency and Waste and also the Learning and Teaching Life Frameworks, and in terms of competency it's on the road. More about the Life Frameworks and Life itself can be found on our EAUC website. Thank you for registering, and thanks also to today's speaker. We have Peter Hopkinson from the University of Bradford. My name's Emma and I'm the Member Events and Communities Officer here at the EAUC. If you have any specific event, webinar or training requests, I will be happy to talk to you at any time. I also work with our community groups, so as a member of the EAUC, I encourage you to join one of our communities of practice or regional groups. More information about these can be found on the Member Zone on our website. You may have previously attended or heard of exchange webinars. These are continuing, but due to their popularity, we have developed a new range of EAUC webinars. These are for EAUC members only and are an added benefit of your membership. They are more detailed with clear learning outcomes, expert speakers, and will allow for a more complex topic. They will all last between an hour and an hour and a half, depending on the topic. Shortly after today's webinar has finished, you will also receive a certificate of attendance to place on your personal development file as a record of the training. So there's just a little bit of housekeeping for me to go over now. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me well. I have muted you all just to avoid any background noise, and you'll continue to be muted throughout today's webinar. If you are having any technical issues at all throughout the webinar, please let me know by posting it on the on-screen chat box at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, or sending me an email to easton@eauc.org.uk, and you can see that email address on the screen at the moment. Hopefully most of you also have working microphones or have dialed in on a phone. Again, don't worry if you don't, as you will have the opportunity to ask any questions at the end via the chat box, or what we are going to encourage is a little bit of conversation and actually unmuting yourself and asking questions that way. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded as a resource with all the presentations later on today. So please feel free to share these resources with any colleagues or fellow EAUC members. Once the webinar has finished, you will be sent a short survey for us to gain your feedback. Please do take a few minutes to complete the survey, as the results will help us to improve our future CPD events and webinars. So that's all from me for now. I will gladly pass over to Peter. Thank you again for registering, and I hope you all enjoy today's webinar.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone. I've spoken to a few of you who've been sort of waiting to kick off. Looked at the delegate list, and strong contingent from Scotland, which is great. I used to have a lot of involvement with the EAUC. That sort of drifted away a little bit, partly because of the work I got involved in around about 2010 around circular economy, and the work with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has absorbed a large part of my time since then. So it was a great pleasure and intrigue actually to have an input from EAUC to just checking. Yeah, my sound's on, isn't it? Yep.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just had a horrible feeling that I was speaking and that people couldn't hear me. Yeah. So the last couple of days, I've been over in Eindhoven running a training course for Philips, the global corporate consumer products, healthcare, lighting division. It's quite interesting to then come back into an educational setting. But I think some of the ideas and some of the key things I want to put across today are absolutely the same, very relevant into a higher education setting, whether you're involved in estates, procurement, teaching and learning, research, knowledge transfer, all those multi-service areas that we know as universities. So what I wanted to do was actually give a bit of an overview of what the circular economy is, on the basis that I couldn't guarantee that everybody would be familiar with it or understand it perhaps in the way that I'll be referring to it on this talk. Now, I'm delighted we've got a couple of students on our MBA. I've got Anne Charlotte, who's in the delegate list. She works for IBM in Stockholm. She's on the MBA. And Estelle, whose surname I still can't pronounce after a year, works for RAP, and they're going to say a little bit about what it's been like to be a student. And this is not a sell for the MBA, but it's actually to ask them to reflect on their experiences of coming into this framework and the way we presented it in the MBA, and what they find interesting, what they've found informative, what they found different from other frameworks that they've perhaps been involved in, and what they find most challenging, and where they see some of the applications and opportunities. So I've got a number of slides, most of them are pictures, so I'm going to whiz through them very quickly so I'll leave plenty of time for talk. The circular economy is referred to as an economy that's restorative by design, and it's in contrast to a linear economy, which is characterized as degenerative and degenerative of capital, natural capital in particular. And the idea of circularity is what I'm going to explain in this talk. The term design is interesting, so it means that it's a form of human intent, that we can dictate and control our own future, that the invisible hand of the market, is not sort of something that we leave to chance or fate, but we can direct our own future as civilizations, societies, economies, universities. So we have choices that we can make, and the question is, what are those choices? So the linear economy, in the way it was originally described by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I think is very useful. It's a take, make, dump, dispose economy. Very successful. We take stuff out of the ground, we make stuff, we manufacture it, we sell it, we use it for a while, sometimes not very long, and then we either dispose of it. And where does it go? Eventually, historically, landfill. Now, some incineration, if we're lucky, some recycling, perhaps. But for various reasons, that doesn't seem a very smart way to run an economy. So the circular economy gives a fresh perspective, I think, on some of the challenges around resources, materials, and energy, but also the way we run our economies and design our economies in the bigger picture. This is the classic diagram that caught people's imagination back in 2012. What is a circular economy? Well, that vertical axis is the linear economy, mining, materials, manufacturing, through to landfill and energy recovery at the bottom. We're very familiar with that. The circular economy looks at promotes a series of feedback loops around two types of materials. On the right-hand side in blue, the technical materials, metals, plastics, and other durable, long-lasting materials. And on the left-hand side, biological materials, which are generally shorter-lived and are consumable and decomposable. And those feedback loops sometimes referred to as business models or actions that you can take to return and reuse materials back in the economy for productive use. And so the challenge is how do you do that? And you can see some of the terms that are referred to: maintenance, reuse, refurbish, recycle. Cascades on the left-hand side for biological materials. I'll say something about that as we go through. But one of the key principles in this is about restoration, a restorative economy, about keeping things moving and in productive use for our benefit, but in a way that not only restores natural capital, but also reduces the depletive nature of the linear economy. Some key concepts and principles. The first is it's a systems-based framework, so we have to think in systems. A lot of the benefits and opportunities that arise from the circular economy require system-level thinking, system-level redesign. In the circular economy, there's no such thing as waste. All waste is food for something else. It's a living system metaphor, so it mimics living systems, nature. It's not a living system, it's a metaphor. So all waste is food. Runs on renewable energy, that great yellow thing in the sky that provides us with plenty of solar radiation is something that would have ultimately power the circular economy. And going back to the living system metaphor, it's an economy where we need to embrace and celebrate diversity and resilience. So we're looking for greater resilience within our economies, and the role of diversity in that is very central. It draws on a number of complementary frameworks and schools of thought that you may be familiar with: biomimicry, regenerative design, cradle to cradle, natural capitalism, blue economy, and performance economy, and others. So it's a synthesis and a collection of ideas, some of which have been around a long time, but put together in what I think is a very elegant and coherent framework for rethinking economic design and the way we run things, and the way we make things, and the way we reuse them. It had a takeoff point in 2012 as a result of work by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and McKinsey, the global consulting group, who did a study of the European economy and looked at a few signature products in the economy and found, that the linear system leads to enormous waste and value leakage, and that if we started to close some of the loops and have developed some of those feedback loops from the butterfly diagram, these are the sort of headline figures that we might start to get every year from that redesign process. And the question is, how do you do that? And the drivers for the circular economy, some of them are very familiar, we'll know them: resource constraints, commodity price increases, commodity price volatility, increasing demand, increasing population, rise of the middle class consumers all over the world, new types of consumers for all sorts of reasons, so affluent consumers who may be feeling less affluent, and people who are definitely not affluent and are poor. How do they access a standard of living and quality of life that they see around them when they can't access, or they have low incomes and can't access certain goods and services? Shifting demographics, huge and amazing advances in technology, particularly the internet, and the transformation effect that has on business models and the relationship between production and consumption. And government who's waking up to sort of saying, ooh, we seem to have something wrong in our economy, whether it's the financial crisis, the stagnation in the Eurozone, geopolitical conflicts, resource security. People are waking up to saying, the linear system has been very successful, it will continue to be successful, but we seem to be coming into a new era, and we need to start to be thinking about a different sort of model, and the circular economy is one type of model. This was the classic graph on commodity price increases, which a lot of people in business woke up to, that if your input prices are rising, how do you handle that? You either go out of business or you have to absorb it. You can't really pass it on to consumers because demand will fall, etc., etc. So it's commodity price increases are a really significant part of the discussion. The rise of the middle class consumer, there's an estimation of 3 billion new middle class consumers by 2030 with purchasing power, particularly in Asia Pacific, India, China. What happens when those consumers start to want the same sort of lifestyles or access to material goods and services as we've had the advantage of for a number of decades? That will fuel further pressures on commodities and resource and energy, and what do we do in that situation? So the argument is, if I think we're in a difficult situation now, look down the line and it's going to intensify significantly. There's a huge amount of concern about scarcity, not necessarily running out, but scarcity and access into critical materials in the periodic table, which are fundamental to many of our key requirements for products, whether it's in electronics or healthcare or aerospace or whatever. You look around and you talk to people in those sectors and they say, what's the future going to look like? So countries that are stockpiling resources, countries where these resources might be extracted, they're difficult, they're complex political, geopolitical regions. So there's all sorts of concern. Sometimes known as the burning deck, certain things are sort of getting people sort of exercise. This diagram is suggesting that the resource efficiency approach, we often talk about resource efficiency in environmental management, we've got to become more efficient. The resource efficiency approach in sort of manufacture, production is very well known, and people put a lot of effort into getting resource efficiency improvements. It gets harder and harder as you make marginal improvements. And if you look at a three classic products across the top: carpet, fridge, furniture. You can get some resource efficiency gains year on year, but the problem is, for that problem I stated before, is as consumption increases and you get more consumers with more purchasing power, those savings that you get start to get outstripped by the rise in demand. So the circular system is looking to keep those products in circulation for more than one life or more than one cycle on the technical nutrient side. What you're looking for are those material intensity reduction potentials. You see the figures on the bottom side. And the question is, how do you do that? How do you achieve that? How do you move from one system, one linear system, to a circular system? So this is just part of the circular economy. This is resource material intensity around products and services. There's four classic building blocks for thinking about developing circularity. One, circular product design, the whole way we make and design things. New business models, how we get stuff back and move things around the cycles, and then system conditions. And I just want to sort of say a little bit about each. So in terms of product design and production, four areas, focus areas for improvement include all the things you're probably familiar with: material selection, modularization, things that make it easier that as a product starts to wear out or come to the end of its life, it enables us to circulate it for a second use or third use, whether it's remanufacture, reuse, refurbishment, etc. As well as making things that are designed to last, moving away from the well-known problem of planned obsolescence, things that are actually designed to wear out after 4 or 5 years. Often only a very small part of a product after 4 or 5 years, unless you're able to replace it economically, you have to throw the whole thing away. So in circular design, there's some great sort of many examples. This is a new form of packaging, which is there to replace polystyrene and styrofoam. This is mushroom packaging, which is now being used by companies such as Dell, Hewlett Packard instead of styrofoam and polystyrene, and interestingly at the same price point. So you can mould it and grow it into all sorts of shapes and forms. So why would you want to do that? Well, if it's the same price, that's the economic case, but also at the end of that life, polystyrene and styrofoam are dreadful materials to handle and add all sorts of costs into an operation to get rid of it. This product could be returned safely into the biosphere on the biological side, decompostable, put into your rocket decomposer or onto your estate's grounds and allowed to rot directly into the ground. We're seeing sort of, the idea of things made to last. Some companies have taken this to high extremes. Patagonia, who sort of have got a new marketing strategy, is discouraging you from buying new. That they're saying once you buy it, A, it's made for it to last for a long time, but B, it's also repairable and you can repurpose it, and getting huge amounts of reward and success as a business for doing that. And you look across the range, you look across all the things we buy in our homes, in a university estate, procurement, anything, paper, furniture, lighting, buildings are all capable of being rethought around circularity. So whether it's cleaning detergents that your cleaners use, this is cradle to cradle, cleaning materials where the packaging is designed for ease of either reuse or ease of detection at the recycling stage. But more importantly, the material inside it is designed for being non-toxic when it's being used and it goes back into the sewage system or the water system. It doesn't have a negative effect and potentially has a positive effect. There are products that, one of the big problems in recycling, as everybody knows, is the complexity and the mix of materials. So how do you simplify that? Here's an umbrella, that's the Ginkgo umbrella, that's made out of, every component of that is made out of the same polymer. Okay, so if that did break and did need to be thrown away, that the whole thing can be put into the same polymer stream without the need for labels or sort of breaking apart and sort of contaminating other sort of recycling fractures. Taking things apart is really difficult, as we know. Things like studs, rivets, odd shaped bolts and things, very difficult to remove. So lots of work going into making fixings that are much easier to take apart. And this is one that, upon the application of heat, sort of loses some of its functionality and moves from the image on the right to the image on the left, enables it to be drawn out, pulled out, and sort of disassembled much more readily and at much lower cost. Business models. What do we mean by business models? Well, there are performance-based models, the shift from product to service rather than buying product, you buy service. The shift from consumer as a consumer to a user. What we mean by that is you don't consume, but what you want is to be able to use something, possibly for a short period of time, and then give it back. So you want the utility and the performance from it, but you don't want to actually have the full ownership and all the costs that are associated with that. And the issue is there's no one size fits all in this area. So some simple examples. So what we see, this is very common in hospitals, very common in universities, lots of stock lying around unused. Idling capacity is sometimes referred to. Inventory, very expensive to purchase, and very expensive then to store. And you look around any large organisation, you'll see lots of this. So we're starting to see something known as the sharing economy, the collaborative economy, collaborative consumption, where small players and big players are starting to unlock the value that's contained within idling capacity. And here we've got Cohelo working in that medical space. This is now a multi-billion-pound business of optimising asset utilisation across within organisations, but also between organisations, so more than one hospital or more than one service provider. So the rise of the sharing economy, it's been well documented. If you look at the house, all sorts of peer-to-peer sharing models are appearing. You can rent your drive, you can rent your dog, you can rent your clothes, you can rent your equipment, you can rent your roof space. The question is, well, what is the limit? Is there a limit? Where would that lie? And we're starting to see community-based peer-to-peer sharing communities. So Park at My House, very well known, where you rent your car space, your drive out for people where there's parking problems or you need ease of access. You can subscribe to a sharing platform and get all sorts of products, clothing, handbags, garments, other forms of equipment that are expensive and you might not use them very often, but you would like to have access to them on a short-term basis. And some of these very old ideas, the idea of hiring a suit for a special occasion, it's very familiar, but they've been the opportunity to operate these at scale because of the rise of the internet and the cheapness of the internet to create these platforms. So, and we're seeing these schemes rising not just at the high end of the garment section, but also at medium and low end. Free electric vehicle charging points, again, the rise of the electric vehicle, you need an infrastructure. You might have one in your garage, and during the day you might lease that out to someone for a price. There's other approaches to service which are really interesting and coming through. So here's a company, Umicore, where they're renting out molecules, leasing precious metals like ruthenium. So going back to that periodic table, that if they're precious, you want to know where they are, and you ideally want to have them back. So you might have a completely different relationship between a provider and a user than we have historically, to enable you to keep these materials circulating for longer. Remanufacturing is a really high growth. There is some figures about the growth of remanufacturing in the US, rapidly outstripping traditional manufacturing by a factor of 3 or 4. And one of the things we were doing with Philips in the last couple of days was looking at remanufacturing as a successful business model. where you take stuff back and you completely remanufacture it as new. So it's not refurbishing, it's remanufacturing as new. And then the third area is reverse cycle and cascades. One of the big challenges in the circular economy is getting stuff back economically. We've got a linear system. It's very easy to get stuff out. That's what it's been designed around. We need to get stuff back. So we're seeing all sorts of developments. Here's, for reuse packaging. You go into the supermarket and you fill stuff up. You take your own packaging back and get a refill. Again, very old model. Here's another one where you're able to take stuff back and either deliver it back, so that becomes a feedstock which you hand on, or you get a credit note for whatever you take back. So in the USA, you've got vending machines now that you can take your phone, your iPhone, or your Samsung Galaxy. It gets scanned. You plug it in. It does a check on it does a diagnostics on the state of the equipment. It gives you an automatic readout. So this will give you $100 for this here and now. And you make a decision there and then whether you give it back or not. So very, very interesting. All sorts of developments around the postal service, which is a reverse logistics system that we've had for 150 years. It tended to be used one way, but increasingly being used two ways. So here's BT redesigning a product to enable it to be posted through the letterbox at your home and to send back the previous product through the letterbox. So the key is thinking through design and making sure that you can get stuff backwards and forwards quickly. The fourth area is system conditions, and I've only got a couple of slides on this, but it's about issues around standardization, around certification, around legislation, around the role of government and procurement in terms of shifting the systems at large scale to enable some of these ideas to operate at larger scale and achieve economies of scale. So Maersk, for example, huge amounts of material go into the construction of their ships, and they've got material passports now for all their new ships, which says exactly what those ships are made out of, what is the material, and then they track those ships all around the world and anticipate when they're going to come to the end of their life. So when they come back, they know exactly what they're made of and what the value is inside those very large vessels. Certification standards, the supermarkets are dreadful places at the best of times, but in particular around fruit and veg, about having standardization and all the fruit and veg that gets thrown away because it doesn't conform to the right shape, size, colour, look, feel. So there's quite an interesting thing called Last Chance Food, about how to overcome that and rejig the standards and certification to enable these nutritious foods to be used in profitable purposes. So that was just a bit of a race through. I'll finish off on a couple of slides before handing over to Anne-Charlotte and Estelle about what does this mean in higher education for teaching and learning. Well, our experiences are this is an interesting, exciting, dynamic framework. I think it's moves us forward on from the debates we've been having for many years around sustainability, education for sustainability, for all sorts of reasons, which might pick up in the discussion. The way we've run the MBA is we've created a number of modules which sit alongside classic MBA modules, and we have key principles and concepts. We focus in on materials, resources and energy. We look at business models, we look at diversity, scale and development, so some of these are the key principles, and then we look at enterprise and innovation, how you take these ideas and apply them and put them into practice inside your own organisation, as Philips are looking to do. Before Christmas, we ran a 2-day event with Unilever, one of the world's largest fast-moving consumer good businesses. What does it mean in a business like that? They're all looking at this framework and saying, there's something in this for us. What does it mean? How do we make it work? So that's how we look at it in the MBA, and then we also do it through a little online course, 6-week cycle, 3 times a year for members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation C100 Club, and basically we spend each week, we will take one of those ideas that are represented in this rapid talk, and we go through those in greater detail with more resources. So we have different entry points, short online courses, MBA, postgraduate certificate, one-off courses, training events. So that's how we approach it. What I'm interested in is looking at the chat and coming back to people about what their questions or queries might be in relation to a higher education context. So that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to hand over to Anne, Charlotte, and Estelle just to respond to 3 questions I gave them, which was what have they found most interesting on their journey on the MBA, which started last January. What have they found most challenging and difficult, and other reflections that they might want to make to this group about what it feels like to be a student coming to this framework for the first time. Okay. So, Anne Charlotte, do you want to kick off, and then Estelle?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll come off the mic.
Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone then. So my name is Anne Charlotte Mellqvist, and as Peter just said, I'm a student at the MBA program, and I work for IBM in Stockholm. So I started the program a year ago with the first group of students, and yeah, we started off with the circular economy specific modules, which was then very interesting course to sort of deep dive directly into the subject. And for me, it has been extremely interesting and very useful already, both in my work life and personally. So my intention is to work with this in a professional way, and I think that will be possible after the studies. And what I particularly like is the holistic approach that we started out with. So the systemic view of things in the circular economy, looking at optimizing the whole rather than the pieces, and also the fact that circular economy talks about these environmental and sustainability issues in terms of economy and business. So it's actually if you want to bring on a change, I think you need to talk to the business in the way that business talks, and that's what the circular economy is doing. So talking business models and value drivers and so on, and hopefully then bringing this up to executive level in the company. So I mean, these issues should be part of what a company is and why a company is there, and not only something that the CSR department is concerned with. So that's my take as a start.
Estelle, Anne Charlotte, what have you found most challenging or difficult?
Well, I think that one challenging subject is long-term versus short-term. So from one end, I mean, there are massive changes that are needed, and I think we all agree that it will take quite a few years to actually reach what we want here with the sort of complete circularity in the economic system. At the same time, we do have some very urgent issues that require some sort of response and solution within a short term. So sometimes I think we need to do things in the short term that might not be, that are more drastic maybe and require more of maybe legal actions and things like that to get going. That's one of the challenges that I thought of.
Okay, great. So if we just hear from Estelle and then throw it open to the audience, or I can ask some questions of the audience as well. So, hi Estelle, can you hear me?
Hi Peter, it's Emma. Estelle has just messaged me saying that she can hear us, but unfortunately we can't hear her. What I'm wondering, Estelle, is if you could message in the chat box your answers and your thoughts to Peter, and whether, Peter, you could say them on behalf of Estelle.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Are there some questions coming in?
Oh. Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, hi Estelle, yes we can.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I've been having a number of technical issues today, so thank you for your patience. I'll continue speaking if that's okay.
Right.
So yeah, really great to have the opportunity to talk to some people about the MBA course, and just to answer Peter's questions, kind of one of the reasons I wanted to participate in the MBA is that I was really keen. I agree with what Anne Charlotte was saying about how this has to be kind of part of the way businesses think and behave, and their kind of short-term and long-term planning. So I was keen to have a kind of business-relevant approach to this work, because they're going to be so essential if we're going to achieve the objectives I know we're all behind. And the second area was really because I quite like problem solving and figuring out how to do things, and it felt really nice to be at the kind of beginning of something that I hope is going to be really big and achieve the level of impact that it has the potential to be. The most inspiring thing I found is, and I had a very inspiring slide, but I did say I've been plagued with technical issues today, and unfortunately it hasn't arrived, but I think Emma's going to circulate it afterwards. And on my slide was a photo of a sculpture, which, if you're lucky enough to go to the Guggenheim in Bilbao, you can see. It's a really big sculpture that is kind of 100 yards long, and you can walk in between all these different sheets of metals. And when you're in it, you can barely see a foot in front of you, but there's a viewing gallery. And when you look up at the viewing gallery, you can see the whole thing kind of laid out before you. And I don't know if you find it in your jobs as well, but I find we've got such specific objectives and things we need to achieve. We don't often have the opportunity to think about things in a bit of a broader sense, and you can hear from the range of examples that Peter's given, like the breadth of the topic, both academically and working with businesses. And it's not very often you have the opportunity to kind of step back and really think about things in that way. So that's what's most inspiring. Just in terms of the hardest thing about it, I definitely agree with what Anne Charlotte was saying about the long-term versus short-term things that can be done. And just to build on that, I think you heard from the range of topics that Peter was talking about, it's pretty mind-blowing. And there's this awful balance you have to strike between trying to convey the range of opportunities and the fact that it's quite groundbreaking, but the need to kind of give specific examples, and the risk alongside that is that you can end up kind of dumbing it down a little bit in terms of engagement or communication, or focusing in too much on a specific element. So one of the things I get frustrated with is that people think the circular economy is about closed loop or recycling, and as we've already heard, it's much more than that. And in terms of how the course is going so far, I was a bit nervous about going back into higher education. It's been a long time, but really enjoying actually the opportunity to learn. That sounds a bit cheesy, but the quality of teaching is really good, and the range of things you get to read up on, learn about. I think it's a really good balance of being guided, which is hard because it's quite a new topic, but also having the opportunity to kind of explore. The other really good element of it is the group, the kind of peers that you have got from all different industries, all different backgrounds and all over the world, which is just fantastic, because again, you don't often have the opportunity to do that. The only limitation in that is that we don't get to maybe have the level of contact or as much as we would want. So there's still quite a lot of challenges, I think, in the area, but I think that the more we can get the message out there and find ways to kind of integrate it into the way people do things, both in education and in business, I think that will be the key to me. So I hope that was useful, and apologies again about the sound issue.
Hi, thanks, and Charlotte, Estelle. That was great. Just a reminder as well, for that, if I didn't mention it, that the MBA is distance learning, so it's designed for people in work. So it's part-time, flexible on a carousel system, where you come in and step off according to your work-life commitments. So we've got probably about 60 on the course now. A new course starting on new intake starting on Monday, and the exec ed starting 2 weeks' time. A couple of questions that came in, and again, throw those open to Anne Charlotte and Estelle as well. First one, I think, was from Gilbert about centralized versus market-based solutions, and I assume centralized meant sort of state control across many different sort of political forms. That's an interesting question about the role of the market and its fostering of linearity. There's no doubt that we've been trained and entrained into a linear system, mass production, mass consumption in the north and in the industrial economies over a number of years. And you know that to some extent certain businesses and economies invented planned obsolescence and fast fashion and the generation of want above need. So it's quite an interesting question, Gil. But I think there's many different ways I could respond to that. The first is we are where we are. We sometimes say the circular economy's got to fit into the modern world. That doesn't mean that the current market setup is perfect. It's a long way from perfect, as we saw with the financial crash, as we see with the absolutely perverse nature of many of the subsidies and incentives that are built into our modern economies. Perverse subsidies for overconsumption versus conservation, the way our tax system works. So we recognise those, but all the time, what I really like about the circular economy is it's a positive framework for change. It's a can-do framework. Tells you what you can do rather than what you can't do, and it's trying to find a way to make it work. But the ultimate objective, going back to that systems diagram, that it's a circular economy that's responsive by design or intent. So we have to keep that in mind all the time. And it doesn't prescribe any particular forms of business behaviour, because what is important is the overall health and effectiveness of the economic system as a whole. So within that, you can have many different forms of activity and outcomes, some of them unpredictable. But what you're looking for is a movement towards regeneration and restoration rather than depletion. Now, one of the schools of, or sort of the ideas that I think is very informative around that is the idea of something called panicky, which comes from sort of ecological thinking about destruction and change, and that ends of eras and transitional phases and transformational phases between one system condition and another. And it strikes me that there's an absolute inevitability about the end of the linear in the way that we've described it here today. It might be 10 years down the line, it might be 50, it might be 100 years, but there's an absolute inevitability. Many of the businesses and institutions that are around today won't be around in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, because we are, I think, going through profound global, international, national, regional, local changes. So what individuals get interested in is okay, what's in it for me? What's happening? How do I operate in this potential new era that we see coming down the line? That's what a lot of businesses are interested in, and I think universities should be interested in that, both as large organisations themselves, but also as educational and research organisations. So we do, and we should continue to engage with some of these big societal economic challenges of this century and centuries to come, and keep finding new new ways of thinking our way through the future in a way that's going to enable us to operate healthily and effectively as a global population, as a global system, as well as all those subscales. So, but there's no doubt that we'll need some state centralised interventions, because we live in that system. We have regulation, we have taxes, we have employment, you know, and that if you don't manage those, you will end up in a situation of you know, ultimately civil breakdown. If you don't have an effective, you know, sort of economic system, you'll end up with civic breakdown, societal breakdown. So we need state influence. I think Anne Charlotte mentioned about legislation. You know, legislation can be very useful in forcing and nudging people in the right direction, but in some ways circular economy is happening outside or ahead of the legislative sort of mindset and paradigm. So it's got to operate in both ways. It needs those larger centralised adjustments. They need to be directed in particular ways. It also, we need to see some adjustments to our current market conditions around subsidies, around externalities, but also the market needs to will move ahead of legislation. There's no doubt about it. So you know, that would be my answer to that. It's a complex question with no easy answer, but so it's getting the right balance. On the other question that I saw from Liz about business schools and moving beyond business schools and linking in with design, interdisciplinarity, etc. Yeah, absolutely, I fully support that. Like most organisations, universities work in silos. Business schools are business schools. They very rarely have product design inside the business school, so you have to go and find your allies in another school, and you end up with all sorts of issues around how you engage with another school. What was interesting yesterday with Philips was we were working with Technology University Delft with their Centre for Industrial Design, who brought that design piece into the session to talk about the role of design and product design, which is very engaging and you know, absolutely sort of the interdisciplinarity that we want. But if you're going to make change inside organisations, there's no doubt you need to have designers, you need to have people from finance, marketing, sales, operations management, training, HR. You know, if you're starting down a transformation programme around this agenda, you've got to have all the key players in the room or in the programme to be able to pull the right levers and to find the right processes to create the change. So you know, I absolutely, you know, yeah, interdisciplinarity is what we want. Getting there takes time. Unless you're very lucky to find yourself in a university where that's already set up, but that's part of my objective, is to keep working in a very interdisciplinary way. And the MBA is just one offer that we've got. You know, we're looking to develop programs in engineering and manufacturing, and the more you do, the more capacity you build and the more critical mass you get, then you can start to have a portfolio of offers that you can bring these disparate, often disparate areas together in a complete holistic system. As Anne Charlotte said, you know, if we're talking about the circular economy as an holistic systems-based approach, then we've got to be doing that in education. You know, there's a bit of a sort of a dissonance otherwise, but we started where we have, and we're making progress. So I don't know if Anne Charlotte or Estelle wanted to just say anything in relation to either of those questions.
Hi, it's Estelle. Yeah, I agree with what you said, and also all the questions show all the different elements and all the different perspectives that we have to think about. So it's this combination of what businesses can do, the multidisciplinary thing, legislation, having the right market framework for it, kind of convincing people and then enabling them to be able to kind of make those changes that is the scale of the opportunity, but also what makes it quite challenging. And I've just put a little comment in, just I agree, in particular about designing it in is really key, but also really, really hard.
Okay. And Shalom?
No, I agree as well. I can just add that there might be another sort of challenge in this that we haven't touched on, and that is the local versus the global perspective. And we are operating in a world which is very global and with enterprises that are global, and maybe there is something more local in this new economic system. And in that way, if there is, we don't really know how that would sort of work out and what impact that would have on existing business and maybe on macroeconomic theory and things like that. So that's also an interesting aspect. But I agree with what Estelle says and what you said.
Thanks. There's a question that came in from Lucy about anthropology and investigations or insights around discard and use behaviours and rationality. I mean, that's a really, really interesting question. I mean, just in a contemporary setting, Lucy, I think the whole thing around our understanding, deep understanding of the modern consumer around reuse and discard is in itself an area where we know relatively little. So I gave an example yesterday that there's a classic textbook in business schools on consumer behaviour. It's 640 pages long, and there's half a page on consumer behaviour in relationship to end of life or disposal of product. So that's the standard textbook on consumer behaviour. So I think that gives you some idea about where the focus of attention is and has been. And that's part of the sort of post-war sort of consumerist marketing, advertising push. And some people I work with in the business school say, you know, we have been educated to consume, we've been educated to discard, and we are manipulated to behave in ways that we don't understand. You know, so I was on a call this morning where someone was telling me about the sensory research team that works for Unilever in terms of how they do market research around sensory responses to products, smell, sight, sound, all the different senses, to affect their product design. And of course, you know, sort of a lot of that will be subconscious when we're either at the point of purchase or the point of use. Going further back, I think there is this, you know, another conversation we were having on Monday was around the different behaviours and practices in India, in different parts of Africa, South America, around local systems of repair and reuse and making use of everything and expecting things to last a long time or be repairable. So almost like a sort of an inherent sort of culture around keeping things moving and circulating and in use for much longer time periods for reasons to do with low income but also, you know, perhaps culturally. Of course, we would have had that. We would have had that if we talked to our grandparents and parents and previous generations. That would have been part of the culture. So, you know, we're going through interesting times. And then if we go further back, look at some of the work of people like Thomas Homer Dixon on the decline and fall of civilization. You know, about why have civilizations collapsed in the past, often quite catastrophically, not being able to adapt or change, often to external resource constraints, not always, but you know, and you know, whether there's something almost inherently built into the systems that we create at certain points in time that have their periods of peak success in terms of consumption and power, and then can't adjust. So that's another really interesting area, and an area that I'm acutely interested in. But from a research point of view, the whole consumer piece around attitudes to reuse, to secondhand, if you went to the shop and you bought something and said, I don't know, this is as new, it's almost as good as new, you'd have a very different reaction to that probably than compared to someone saying it's new. So, well, what do you mean? What do you mean it's almost new? Well, what do you mean by that? For certain products, we'd take it almost, that's fine. If we're buying a second-hand car, that's taken as a given. But if it was something else, a coffee machine, for example, we want to say, well, who had it before? And, how do I know that it's X, Y, and Z? So, yeah, I mean, that whole thing is ripe for further research and should be really part of our educational and learning programs. Yeah, I agree with Estelle about the attitudes to food as well. Yeah, we always think everybody's sort of behaving slightly worse than we are. Yeah, I'd agree with what you say, Lucy, about that, disposing it in great lumps at the end of academic years. I mean, we were having a conversation with Phillips yesterday about how you might then design an offer to a student population for all the things that they might need or want when they're moving away from home or moving into a property. That ultimately then could be packaged up and sent back, either to be refurbished and sold again or remanufactured or recycled, where you have a service arrangement, a contract, so that there's an incentive for the students to send it back in whatever shape or form, whether it's broken or not, that there's a relationship that's being formed and that the company takes ownership over the ultimate fate of those products, rather than the students sort of looking at it and saying, you know what, can't be bothered, we'll just stick it in the bin, or we'll leave it here for the next occupant. So once you start to get into it, there's some quite interesting thinking going on, and there are some of those service offers already for students, but they tend to be mixed products and no take back offer. Yeah. And a question for me to people on the session really is: do you see opportunities for some of these ideas being put into the higher education sector or into your particular university? Is there enough valid and trustworthy data, and is it truly easily accessible at the moment? I think it's on a case-by-case basis, Emma. It depends on what it is that we're talking about. If we're talking about a building, possibly not. If we're talking about a photocopier, definitely. If we're talking about, I don't know, other large items, laboratory equipment, yes, there probably is. What we'd be interested in doing is looking at some case studies, real case studies inside real universities, to actually develop that and provide some case studies that EAUC could use to communicate and promote circular economy principles and ideas into the sector. So if that's something of interest, be happy to have a further conversation on that. There's no doubt business cases are absolutely critical.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Peter. I'm conscious that it is 1 o'clock, and I've had a few private messages from people saying that they need to get on with other meetings and their day. But generally, I know that it's gone down very, very well, so I would like to thank you very much. I'd also like to thank everybody for attending on today's webinar. I hope you have all found it very beneficial. And I'll be in contact with you later with a certificate that links to today's recorded webinar and a very short survey. So brilliant, thank you everyone, and hopefully see you on the next webinar.
Thanks Emma, thanks Anne-Charlotte, thanks everyone.